The very word spoken to me, and now I'm desperate for you, and now I'm lost without you. I'm desperate for you, and I'm lost without you. This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe. Your holy presence living in me. This is my daily bread. This is my daily bread. Your destined to die, pour out for all mankind. God's only Son, perfect and spotless one. He never sinned, but suffered as if he did. All authority, every victory is yours, Savior. Honor and power forever, worthy of all of our praise. You overcame, Jesus. Awesome in power forever, awesome and great is your name. You overcame. Power in hand, speaking the Father's plan, sending us out, light in His broken land. All authority, every victory is yours, Savior, worthy of honor and glory, worthy of all of our praise. You overcame, Jesus. Awesome in power forever, awesome and great is your name. You overcame. We will overcome by the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony. Everyone overcome. We will overcome by the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony. Everyone overcome. We will overcome by the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony. Everyone overcome. Worthy of honor and glory, worthy of all of our praise. You overcame, Jesus. Awesome in power forever, awesome and great is your name. You overcame, you overcame. Worthy of honor and glory, worthy of all of our praise. You overcame.
The Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 to 42, the Common English Translation. While Jesus and his disciples were traveling, Jesus entered a village where a woman named Martha welcomed him as a guest. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his message. By contrast, Martha was preoccupied with getting everything ready for their meal. So Martha came to him and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to prepare the table all by myself? Tell her to help me." The Lord answered, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. One thing is necessary."
She was the model woman, a gracious host, a domestic dynamo, a real servant heart. Martha heard that Jesus was in the area. She insisted on hosting him for dinner. An impressive sit-down meal for 13 or more men. Hors d'oeuvres, side dishes, sauces, desserts, bread, salad, and wine. Place settings seating arrangements, music, and lighting. After frantic preparations, the guests filed in and filled the room with laughter, jokes, and stories. Plates of scrumptious food were presented. Appropriate articulations of oohs, ahs, and mms rewarded Martha for all of her hard work. The best was yet to come. Jesus began to teach. It was perfect, except for one thing. When Jesus began to lecture, Mary took a seat. She sat there wide-eyed, oblivious to the obligations she was neglecting. It was outrageous. She abandoned Martha to do the work herself. What's worse, she was sitting where she didn't belong. A woman student? It was presumptuous, irresponsible, and out of place. With each trip into the banquet hall, Martha glared at Mary. She got angrier and angrier until finally she erupted. "Jesus, Mary has abandoned me. Tell her to do her fair share." You would expect for Jesus to support this type of work ethic. He does not. Rather, he rebukes Martha. "Martha, Martha, you are upset and agitated about too many things." We, too, tinker at our worship and work at our worry. Labor instead of listen. We plan instead of adore. How appropriate Jesus' words still are. Mary has chosen the better, and it will not be taken away from her. Dear Christian Martha, Jesus never asked for a meal, but he craves a companion. From Luke 10:38 through 42.
So when I was a kid, one of my favorite movies was Back to the Future. Many of you have probably seen it. It's a classic. It's about a young man named Marty McFly, a high school kid who travels back in time to see his parents when they were his age, and he has to, make sure they get together in order to preserve the future. And it's a really fun movie. But there was always one character that stuck out to me in the movie, and it was a little-known character named Mr. Strickland. And Mr. Strickland was Marty's high school principal in the year 1985, which is the year the movie takes place in. So in 1985, Mr. Strickland is Marty's principal at his high school. And there's a scene where early on in the movie, where Marty shows up late to school. And Mr. Strickland catches him and he starts calling him a slacker. And he tells me he remembers his dad, and his dad was a slacker too. And because it's one of my favorite movies, I'd heard that phrase slacker over and over and over. So when I was the youth group leader at the Herkimer Church, it kind of became my nickname for the kids in my youth group. I was always calling them slacker. Never said it to be mean. It was kind of a running joke. So if a kid missed Sunday school one week, the next week I come back and say, "Hey, there's a slacker who missed class last week," and it just became a running joke. And even to this day, when I see some of my former youth groupers on Facebook, I will, and it's their birthday, I'll say, "Happy birthday, slacker," or something like that. Even a few years ago, one of my former youth group kids was getting married, and she asked me to be a part of the wedding. So when I was giving the sermon during the service, I said to her, as she's in the middle of her wedding vows, I said, "Marriage is tough. You can't be a slacker." And her sister, who was also in the youth group, was right behind her, like trying not to laugh. And I could see the look on my former youth's face, and she was a little miffed at that reference, but it was fun. So the reason I bring that up is because whenever I read today's passage, the passage of Mary and Martha, I always look at Mary as the slacker of the Bible. Now, because either of us, all of us who are hearing this message or in worship together, we can either identify with Martha in this story, or we can identify with Mary. And I guess based on my attitude of calling Mary a slacker, that I'm more of a Martha. But depending on how you see yourself is going to shape how you see this story, and your faith is going to shape how you see this story. Because if you think that being a Christian and being in your faith is all about being served and focusing on your own spiritual well-being, then you're going to be like Mary. And you're going to see in this passage that Jesus is affirming Mary's behavior. But if your faith is centered around servitude and doing for others, then you're probably more of a Martha. And this passage in a way might offend you because it feels like Jesus maybe is saying how you see your faith isn't as important as how Mary sees her faith. It can be a divisive passage, but that's only because of our human nature to hear what we want to hear. What this passage is really about is the balance between servitude and being in the presence of Jesus, being with Jesus. Several years ago, there was an article in the New York Times Magazine where an author's Maureen Dowd and Thomas L. Friedman described a conversation that once took place between former Secretary of State James Baker and former President George Bush Sr. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak was going to be arriving soon for a visit. And so Baker hurried into the Oval Office to brief President Bush, telling him what the sore spots were, what favors he should be asking of Mubarak, and what aid they would be seeking. Well, Mubarak is going to ask for money, is what Baker warned Bush before the Egyptian leader entered. And then Bush said to Baker, "You're going to have to say no. You tell him he can't have any money," the president replied. "Turning down money is dirty work. That's your job, Jimmy. I want to do the good stuff." I think we can all relate to that. We all want to do the good stuff, the fun stuff, the stuff that doesn't involve conflict, the stuff that is just easy and it makes us feel good. But the problem is that in every part of life, there's work that needs to be done. In this passage, the problem is not in that Martha was showing hospitality and she was being a servant. Martha isn't rebuked by Jesus for being a good host and focusing on that. She's rebuked because instead of just being the good host, she's condemning Mary for not being like her. Martha was asking Jesus to tell Mary that she was wrong, and Jesus wasn't going to do that. But let's be honest, when Jesus was done teaching Mary, they would have been looking for food, and they'd be pretty happy that Martha was in the kitchen slaving away that whole time. The problem is we are often torn between what we have to do and what we want to do. Of course, we all want to be like Mary and not have to worry about anything, not have any real responsibility. The difference is some of us are wired to where we can't ignore responsibility while others can. There are some people who are perfectly content to sit by and watch things fall apart as long as they don't have to do anything. Some of us just aren't wired that way. Some of us feel like we have to fix things, like we always have to be the responsible one. And that means that we're the first ones to budge when we're sitting around waiting for people to do the right thing, to help out. We're the ones who are going to just step in and do it rather than hold other people accountable to do what they need to do. And that creates resentment. And when those who have no problem letting things fall apart don't step up and keep just doing what they want to do, living life the way they want to live it, it creates a certain level of frustration. It's not hard to find people to do fun stuff. But when everyone does the fun stuff, then a very small number are left to do the stuff that maybe isn't so much fun, and that can lead to a lot of resentment. And that's what we're seeing with Mary and Martha here. Martha's very resentful towards Mary because Martha would probably like to be hanging out on the floor, listening to Jesus, not having a care in the world. But she feels like she needs to prepare the meal. She needs to be the hostess. But what would this story look like if instead of telling Jesus to tell Mary to get off her butt and help in the kitchen, instead Martha, in front of Jesus, invited her to help? Mary might still have just sat there, but then instead of Jesus telling Martha not to condemn her sister, maybe Jesus would have then said to Martha, "Why don't you join us?" There's a big difference between condemnation and invitation. If you want people to step up to help with something, you'll get much better results if you invite them to come along than if you shame them for not volunteering. But who knows? Maybe Mary offered to help, but Martha's such a bully in the kitchen, Mary didn't want to deal with it. That happens a lot too, where we always say we want people to help us, but it has to be on our terms. They have to do things our way. People can't have a voice. They're there to be a worker bee, not to have a voice in how things are done. Maybe that's the issue here. Maybe Martha has to have her kitchen run her way, and nothing Mary did was good enough. So Mary's like, why bother? Why be bullied in the kitchen? I'm going to sit here and talk to Jesus. So I want to ask you a question. How many in this church, how many Marthas do you think we have, and how many Marys do you think we have? Think about it for a minute. I'll tell you my experience in my 4 years here at Trinity. This is a church with a ton of Marys, very few Marthas. And what do I mean about that? We don't have a lot of different people that are willing to serve in committees. It's usually the same people over and over and over. We have this ministry audit team that is meeting with the district superintendent and with a consultant from the conference. There weren't a lot of people that stepped up to be a part of that. Pretty much everyone who stepped up to be a part of it is on the team. When there are problems with the church building, I bring them up. Nobody steps up to get them done. People seem to be okay with the roof leaking. People seem to be okay with stuff falling apart. People seem to be okay with things looking like a mess. And in my history here at the church, every time I've asked people or invited people to help out with things, it hasn't gone well. I'm just going to give you a few examples of things that have been said to me when I've asked people to step up. A few years ago, we hosted the UMW with the church, and they said, hey, we'd love to come, and it'd be nice if, some people from your church would prepare lunch for us. We'll pay for it. And we'll actually make a big donation to your church for the lunch. It's be nice if you guys could host us. And when I asked for people in the church to step up and help host the UMW, 0 people offered to help. So I had to come in and I had to order lunch, and I had to come in, I had to make coffee. And when I made a comment that no one stepped up, I had a member of this church say to me, well, we don't want to do things like that. When we were first not coming out of, but when we were first coming back to being an in-person worship after COVID, there was a lot of, it's hard to remember now, it seems so long ago, but there was a lot of restrictions on what it meant to be in worship. You might remember we had to have pews spaced out a certain way. We had to have a cleaning regimen. We had to have a plan in place to keep the sanctuary safe for if we return to in-person worship. And I had a couple members of our SPRC team say to me, well, what do we need to do to be back in the sanctuary for worship? I said, well, what we need is for a handful of people to take 5 minutes to grab some Lysol wipes and wipe down the pews and wipe down the counters. And their response, that's asking too much of us. It's same people on the SPRC committee. So what would it take to make you a full-time pastor? Because as most I'm not even full-time in my last 4 years here. What would it take to make you full-time? I said, well, we need to talk about spending. We need to talk about stewardship. We need to talk about how to be able to financially support a full-time pastor. And said, we're not going to talk about money. And they walked away. A lot of the correspondence from the church, from me to the church, because I'm trying to meet so many people, is I do mass emails. Well, then there are certain people who don't read their emails. And then their response to them not getting their emails is, well, you should have found another way to contact me, as if I'm a personal secretary. These are all things that people just want to be fed. They want to be served. They don't want to have to actually do anything. They just want things to magically happen for them. And some have interpreted this passage of Martha and Mary to mean that it's okay for that to be the case. It's okay to be lazy. But that's not at all what this passage is saying. Jesus is never condemning what Martha was doing. He was condemning her for how she was reacting to Mary. It's not an either-or situation. Both Martha and Mary could have gotten things ready for the meal with Jesus, and they both could have been at the feet of Jesus hearing his teachings. Maybe the case was Martha was preparing a 10-course meal, and Jesus would have been happy with a light snack. The issue was that Martha wasn't that Martha was focusing on serving. It was that she was dismissing the importance of what Mary was doing by listening to Jesus, when the reality is both were important. In the church, we often have a lot of conflict over this, between those who believe the purpose of the church is to be in servitude, in mission, inside and outside the walls, and those who think the purpose of the church is just to sit in the sanctuary and be entertained. Both are important, but it should not be one or the other. This story is not about which is better. It's not saying that Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus was inherently more important. It was very important. But at the same time, service is also important. Service and learning are both hallmarks of following Jesus. Maybe if Mary helped Martha, she wouldn't have been so stressed. But maybe if Martha would have not put so much unnecessary pressure on herself, she would have had time to sit at the feet of Jesus too. But the core problem in this passage isn't that Martha was focused on serving, it's that she wasn't focused on Jesus. In the life of the church, we have lots of busy servants who aren't necessarily busy for Jesus, they're busy for themselves. They stress themselves out trying to do the things, claiming it's for Jesus, but it's really for themselves. In my entire time in ministry, I'll tell you, I've never been yelled at or attacked or accused of doing anything that was in contradictory to the teachings of Jesus. Not once. On the other hand, I have been screamed at and attacked many times for people mad at me for not doing what they wanted me to do, or not giving them permission to do what they wanted to do. What Martha was doing wasn't wrong. What was wrong was why she was doing it. Service and worship are both important pieces of a life with Christ, and prioritizing one over the other serves no purpose. In the life of the church, there is a lot to be done. And if everyone carries just a little bit of the load, then there should be more than enough time for all of us to be like Mary and just be in the presence of Christ. Now let us pray.
Okay, maybe we need to go over this one more time.
Do we have to?
Well, sweetie, I don't know if you're getting a good grasp of the ratios here.
Fine.
Okay, all right, step by step. Before we spend any money, what's the first thing that we do?
Give to God.
Good. And why do we do that?
Because he first loved and gave to us.
Good. Okay, great. Now, the second jar here is for so many different things.
Hold on.
What?
God lives in heaven, right?
Yeah, he lives in heaven.
And heaven has streets paved with gold, right?
Streets paved with gold, sure, yes.
So why does he need my money if I don't even have a job?
Okay, all right, so good question. So basically when we give to God, we're giving to the church.
So the church gives the money to God?
No, the church keeps the money.
Oh, does God know about this?
Yes, he basically built the system, yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay. See, sweetie, as you grow up, there is nothing better than giving back to God. In the Bible, it's the only place God says, test me on this. When it comes to your money, he says, test me. It's almost like he's saying, I dare you. And your mom and I, we do just that. Even when things are tough, we always give the first part of our money back to God. And then the church takes that money and does all kinds of things to make God famous, like camps and mission trips and even VBS that you love so much, and even helps out people that are in need. You can't outgive God. And when God says test him, and you do it, he will come through every single time.
Okay, Dad, I get it. I do have one question, though.
Oh, okay.
Why do we need to test God if he already knows all the answers?
That's good. Let me just retrace my steps here just for a minute.